Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Commerce Pulse Quarterly Roundtable. My name is Michelle, and I will be hosting our event today. I am joined by my colleague, Jean, who will be helping me share today's data with you all, as well as our three panelists today, Hugh Fletcher, Global Marketing Director at Wunderman Thompson Commerce, Naji El-Arifi, Head of Innovation at Wunderman Thompson Commerce, and Brian Walker, Chief Strategy Officer at Bloomreach. Thank you all for being here today. For those of you joining us for the first time, Commerce Pulse is a quarterly event that highlights data we gather here at Bloomreach. Through our Commerce Experience Cloud, we power digital commerce experiences for hundreds of brands and retailers around the world, giving us insight into the state of commerce today and into what we can expect in the future. Each month, we detail those commerce trends on the Bloomreach blog, which you can find on our website. But today, we will focus on the most recent data from March and also reflect back on the larger spring quarter. We'll break that down into 4 sections: a general overview, a look into a few B2C sectors, a brief look into B2B, and then we will end with some predictions for the summer ahead. So to kick things off, I'm going to pass it over to Jean, who will share some key data points about the overall e-commerce trends we have seen this quarter. Jean?
Thank you very much, Michelle. So looking at the overview of e-commerce results of Q1 2022, first, we're going to look at the data of North America. We see that March year-over-year overall sales increased. Sales decreased by almost 5%, led to a traffic decrease of 17% in March 2022. The conversion rate, conversely, went up about 14%. And the average order size went also up for a more modest result of 2.05%. Now, when we compare to UK and EU results, we see that traffic, sales, and conversion rates saw a dramatic decrease in March 2022 of an average of 23% decrease, whereas the average overall order size went up pretty intensely of 20%, by 20%. Now, when we look at the data of the Q1 as a whole, we see in North America that traffic went down by 16% and sales also went down by 8%. Conversion rate went up modestly, and the average order size went up, more importantly, of around 10%. When we look at the data again for UK and EU, we see that traffic, sales, and conversion rates again went down on average of 16%, while the average order size went up by 31%, so a great increase. Now, looking at more precise data of March 2022 versus February 2022, we see here that North American sales in March went up dramatically by 26%, when in the UK and in the EU, it only went up more modestly by around 10%. So I'm going back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Jean. Okay, Brian, let's start with you. Can you maybe set the scene for us? Let us know what stands out from that data we just saw.
Yeah, I think there's so many different factors that were at play across Q1. So if we just sort of zoom out and look at sort of the Q1 numbers, we have to recognize that the Omicron virus was having a bit of a different impact between North America and the EU. And in North America, we were seeing COVID restrictions easing, people kind of emerging both out of winter, hopefully, in your locale, as well as just starting to spend more freely. And we sort of see this interesting difference between how consumers feel about the economy and how they're spending. Whereas in the UK and EU, they were, impacted pretty significantly by a more recent surge in Omicron, which I think certainly had an impact. But there's a couple of other factors that are clearly at work here. One being clearly inflation. with inflation running at an annual rate in the US of almost 8%. And if you zoom in on some other sort of factors at play in e-commerce, that 8%, I should say, in the US, shipping costs, for example, rose almost 15% across Q1, with home delivery rates from FedEx and UPS and other carriers being increased, to some degree due to fuel costs, and perhaps gaining some additional margin related to being able to raise rates. In the UK and Europe, similarly, inflation is having a big impact on consumer confidence. Inflation running at about an annualized rate of about 9 to 10% in the UK and Europe, having a dramatic impact on consumer confidence. In fact, if we look at consumer confidence in the economy, it's actually at a many decades low. Basically, it hasn't been this low since the early 80s in North America, and it hasn't been this low since really the early 50s across the UK and Europe. That's a pretty significant shift coming out of the pandemic, and certainly the rate of inflation is having a pretty dramatic impact. And of course, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia had a pretty dramatic impact on certainly European consumers and UK consumers in particular. We don't quite see the same impact on North American consumer behavior, but I think there's kind of been a double impact from the invasion of Ukraine in late February. One being consumers being very distracted by the humanitarian crisis and the global geopolitical shift that was very dramatic, signaled by that invasion. And similarly, another impact on consumer confidence in the economy. So we see this sort of interesting, almost schizophrenic reaction between North America and UK and Europe across Q1. And it'll be very interesting to see, of course, how that plays out as we continue into Q2. And we all follow the news very closely, and certainly the economy weighing heavily on consumers' minds.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess maybe segueing from that, Hugh, Brian touched on it a little bit, the difference between North America and EU and UK, but any other factors there at play that you could shed some more light on?
Well, I mean, I'm the marketing guy, so following up on that in-depth analysis is pretty tough, and I think Brian did a great job of summarizing that. I suppose, my biggest takeout is the difference between those 2 years and the initial negative sentiment you feel towards perhaps what's happening in e-com, which I think is a little bit misleading, because in reality, we're talking about a lockdown year versus an opening up year, depending on where you are, that being in various different degrees. But essentially, people wanting to re-socialize, going out, lockdown ending, more socializing in general. So something we noticed was just that consumers wanted to get back to shops. They wanted to start seeing people. They wanted to get a bite to eat and a drink while they were shopping. So that's had a negative impact on e-com sales, perhaps, but I don't think is representative of a trend. Kind of thinking more specifically about kind of the differences, I think one of the really interesting things we find across any of the research that we do is that actually consumers are very similar the world over. We like to all imagine ourselves as being very different and very unique and culturally different, which we are. But when it comes to e-com, lots of things remain the same: ease, speed, convenience, range, all driving the same behaviors across all those different markets. However, when we do delve a little bit deeper into our data, there's quite an interesting trend that we see with Europeans, which is they are a little bit more stuck in their ways when it comes to change after the pandemic, a little bit more likely to revert back to what they did in the past, whereas certainly US and to a degree sort of consumers we see in LATAM as well as a different region, really eager to change the way that they shop. And also, us Europeans are much less technologically brave. So I think we'll talk later on about sort of technology and future trends, but we certainly see that the US market is much more embracing of new trends. And I guess that'll be important in the long run. But I think my takeout is generally that the trends are still the same. We're transitioning towards a heavily e-com based retail market. Our data tells us that over 50% of of retail sales is going to be online. That trend's not stopping, even if these numbers are a certain blip. I think for the reasons that Brian talked through and for the reasons that we're all kind of experiencing at the moment, those numbers have come up. And they're a slight blip, but certainly not represented the overall trend.
I think this maybe cues up a nice intro to what I want to ask Naji for, which is a little bit of that technology piece that you mentioned, whether or not the trends are indicative of, larger consumer sentiment. I think e-commerce growth is on everyone's mind. So I'm kind of curious, when we consider the technology aspect of it, Naji, do you think that what we've seen this past quarter is going to lead businesses to, I don't know, maybe be a little bit more daring with the types of technologies they're willing to adopt?
I'm hopeful. I say that all the time because I think companies need to be trying or testing out new technologies constantly, right? You can't look at the previous quarter and go, oh no, it wasn't very good. I should try innovating. You know what I mean? That's probably not a great strategy because you're going to be a little bit behind. I think in some cases, companies will probably end up being forced to try things. And I think that comes down to some new channels that we're starting to see. So things like gaming commerce is starting to be a little bit more influential, a little bit more interesting. We're starting to see things like the metaverse, being talked about so much over the last year. I don't know about you guys. I'm not sick of it yet, but I'm getting close. But it's an interesting technology that I think it's super early days on. And I think once things like NFTs come out, and we'll probably talk about later maybe, I think we'll start to see companies almost being forced to test out those new technologies. But if you're sitting here right now and going, oh no, it wasn't a great quarter, I need to try things, you should have been doing that anyway, because again, innovation or technological changes, especially when it's new stuff you're trying, it's not like a tap you could just turn on and off, right? So a lot of the times you will get things wrong. You'll try something and it will fail. So you really want to be doing it all the time to make sure that you can keep up with everything. And especially with the speed a lot of these technologies are going, you can't really be a fast follower anymore because things are happening so quickly. You really got to just get on with things and just run your race at this point.
I think those will have very significant longer term implications. And I agree with you, Naji. I think as businesses look though to what they're going to try to achieve this year, they're going to have to really double down on sort of key tactics like customer retention, reactivation, marketing to the customers they acquired, through their digital channels during the pandemic. And of course, cost of customer acquisition has skyrocketed, and we've got to shift in terms of the marketing blend kind of in the near term. And I agree, experimenting with some of these emerging channels and experiences is going to be important for many. But as you pointed out, they're not probably going to have near-term impacts on results. So there's a balancing act there, clearly.
I think also, irrespective of what's happened in the last, quarter or whatever, what we see is the trends are the same. And it's a very boring thing to say, but the pandemic's accelerated what we were seeing for lots of years. I'm sure you've heard that line trotted out a million times, but that is absolutely true. And those businesses that are ahead are those businesses that invested in their infrastructure, in their technology, in their customer experience ahead of time. And what we see particularly is the businesses succeeding are those that invested in their services, because more and more consumers are wanting great service. We see much more loyalty to service than necessary to brand. And therefore, the investment that's been made over the last couple of years, be it in technology or in experience, as I said, that's starting to bear fruit now.
Mm-hmm.
As Naji says, it can be hard just to react to that, but hopefully most businesses have known about these consumer changes and these trends that have been coming, and have been investing for quite some years, and are hopefully starting to bear some fruit now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. All right, that was a great overview. I want to switch gears a little bit now and dive deeper into some specific sectors in B2C in particular, looking at apparel and luxury and grocery and home improvement, just really looking at everything. So John, can you go ahead and take us through those numbers, please?
With pleasure, I can. So looking at B2C e-commerce data, we are going to start with apparel, where we see that year over year in March and for the Q1, sales were up against a lower traffic for apparel. Conversion rates was up in March, but down for the quarter, so negative result. And when we look at the average order size, it's up significantly both for March and for the quarter. It was a very good result for the quarter. Now, when we look at luxury, we see that it's having a very strong start to the year, with sales up over 100% year over year in March, and very strong for the quarter. We also see that the traffic is increased a lot by 43% in Q1. Here we also see that conversion rate had a strong improvement in March and a positive result for the quarter. And the average order size in luxury, whereas only up modestly here, we can see, with a increase of only 1% in Q1. Now, when we look at home furnishings and home improvement, we see two very different results here between people purchasing online to work on their homes and apartments versus furnishing their home and apartments. So home furnishing remains on a very strong trajectory. We can see here building on the momentum of the previous 2 years with a conversion rate up to over 76% in Q1. But when we look at home improvement, we see a dramatic dramatic increases online during the pandemic, and now it's starting the year relatively soft, with sales down almost 40% in Q1, primarily driven by a decrease in traffic of about 30%, whereas the average order size still goes up. So last but not least, let's not forget about grocery. Grocery in March and in Q1 is starting the year pretty flat. We see that sales are down slightly. The traffic is pretty much the same, except for Q1, which still increased by almost 10%. And conversion rates were down, and average order size was only up modestly in March and across Q1. So back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Jean. Naji, let's start with you in the retail sector. Apparel trends were all pretty positive outside of traffic, and I think this is an area that's continued to see pretty great growth the past 2 years, with the pandemic in particular. But I'm curious if you think that, or if you've seen anything from retailers, anything interesting that they're doing to adapt as they keep up to that substantial growth that they've seen these past 2 years.
Yeah, so there's actually two things here. So one of them that I've seen quite interesting over the last couple of months is Amazon getting more into the physical space to give people access to the products. So they've effectively pulled out of books, and they're forced to invest more in the just walk out technology. They're trying to bring the tech experience they've had from building some really great experiences that are really customer centric into the physical space. We're seeing that from Alibaba as well in their Hummer stores in China. I think those are super interesting experiences where, again, they've taken learnings from digital to apply to the physical experience. But I think another thing that we've seen quite a lot of is how much customers have basically had issue with products not being in stock. And so we're starting to see more and more retailers invest more heavily in their ability to shift product from A to B. So whether or not that's something like one of our clients utilizing AI to deliver better experiences for customers for when they can have their products delivered, and knowing when to refill certain products in the warehouse, and when to start shifting things to different places. Those are, I think, the kind of things that we're starting to see more of. So this kind of idea of the higher investment in logistics, basically, because that is the issue at the minute, is people not getting access to the products that they want.
Yeah, that seems to be, I mean, that was something you touched on back in our holiday Commerce Pulse as well, Brian. It seems like a fairly persistent issue across the months.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to shift over to luxury. Hugh, this is an area that we have covered quite a bit in Commerce Pulse, but it just continues to show astounding growth every single quarter. I'm curious, what do you think that growth says about digital strategy in luxury? And what do you think other people can be taking from that?
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for coming to me for luxury. I mean, I have 3 children, so the best luxury I have is time. But I'll try and answer a question on luxury online. I mean, I think this is a really interesting area, and the numbers are fascinating because it's been an ongoing conversation. Can you do luxury properly online? Can you get the customer experience right? And as you said, you've touched on this before, and I think the resounding answer to this is yes, yes, yes. You know, we did some research during lockdown, and we asked specifically luxury consumers, and they told us that online had saved them during the pandemic and during lockdown. So I think what the lockdowns did is break the back of lots of luxury buyers who were then prepared to purchase online. Obviously, there are initially some challenges for them, fewer events to attend, socializing. Bizarrely, we found that actually less opportunities to gift meant they spent less on luxury online. But again, as we've seen the society start to open up, we see more events again, start to seeing friends, and therefore it's kind of kicked off in luxury. And I think the hangover is that people have proven to themselves that they can purchase in luxury online. So all very good. I think a couple of things really come out, and one of the things is big ticket commerce, as we've called it. So actually, people are prepared to spend a lot of money online. The research we did amazingly indicated that for kind of higher spenders across the UK, US, and China, the average that they were happy to spend on one product was $244,000 online. Ridiculous. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. And even people who we would consider sort of very lower level luxury purchases still happy to spend in excess of about $1,000 online. So we start to see this idea that, you know, online is only about small purchases or people not preparing to spend a lot of money. That's just not true. People are happy to spend big. And actually, in a past life, I worked in the automotive trade. And when we were looking at people who are happy to put down deposits for cars, it was always the larger deposits for the more expensive cars that were easier for people to put down online than it was for the cheaper ones. So I think we can kind of dispel this myth that luxury can't be done online. It absolutely can. The learning is about the experience. So, you know, how you take the customer through it, how you make it special, how you make it exclusive, and, you know, really ensuring that someone gets that feeling that they are still buying something that is luxurious, that is exclusive, that perhaps not everyone can get, albeit it's through a medium that everyone uses. And then again, kind of looking at what our data told us, which I thought was quite interesting, is the things that consumers were happy to buy in terms of luxury: tech, fashion, holidays, experiences, watches. But there are some areas where they need to work a little bit harder. And that's cars, art, home interiors, jewelry, and food and alcohol. That's what they told us. So I think if there's a luxury company out there that isn't investing in its online experience, that isn't thinking about how to sell to its customers, then they are in big trouble. You know, luxury can and should and will be sold much more online.
I fully agree with you. I think, you know, the pandemic forced the hands of many luxury brands and retailers who had been very hesitant, believing that they needed to get their customers into their boutiques and stores in order to surround them with service and pamper them, so to speak. And the pandemic broke that kind of myth, as you pointed out. And I think it's, you know, we're sort of the carriage horse or the polo horse is out of the gate now, I guess you'd say.
And also that physical experience, I think, which was always so key, perhaps acted as a barrier to lots of people actually entering that luxury market.
That's right.
Once that was gone, again, other people could enter it. You know, they perhaps didn't have that barrier, didn't have that fear, and therefore it's opened up a whole new subset of consumers as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think now we see, you know, still issues with travel and so forth kind of impacting kind of, you know, retail tourism, which is a huge driver of the luxury sector offline. And so we see online really picking up. But I do think it's important to reflect on the fact that early in the pandemic, luxury was doing very poorly as a category overall. And I do think we see sort of an impact of, you know, the income disparity, right? Those who were doing well are doing even better and have more and more spending power. And now they have reasons to spend. They have events to go to. They have travel to do, even though I said that, there's still some challenges there. And that's fueling a lot of the spending, and certainly easing out of lockdowns and post-pandemic behavior is also, I think, driving the apparel category. It is interesting to see that luxury is the one category in our data that does not seem to reflect inflationary pressure, which might also indicate that the luxury brands have changed their assortment mix and are maybe even bringing their products into a more affordable categories.
Or potentially reflecting that luxury consumers are less affected by inflationary rises.
That's true, but just the average order size number, I guess, being relatively flat year over year is kind of interesting. It's really the only category that really reflected that. So I thought that was interesting.
I also think there's something around what we've kind of called the post-COVID gratification wave, right? Which is, we've all got some pent-up spending that we want to do, lots of experiences that we haven't managed to achieve.
That's
and therefore, our view of what we deserve or what we should treat ourselves to has probably changed. I mean, if you haven't been on holiday for 3 years, probably your budget for your holiday is going to have gone up pretty considerably.
That's right.
It's not like it used to be. So yeah, I think maybe some kind of pat on the back or treat following pretty tough years has also helped to give a bolster to the luxury market.
And as you said, gifting is also probably driving some of this, such as wedding
self-gifting.
Support. Yeah, self-gifting.
Self-gifting as well. I have a list of things that I want to get.
Well, anyone who's looking to spend a lot of money in luxury, feel free to send them my way. I want to make sure we touch on the other sectors too that Jean had covered in the data. So Brian, when we look at home furnishings, home improvement, even grocery, is there anything there that stood out to you?
Well, I think home improvement in many ways is driven by the housing cycle. And we're sort of at a kind of a low point in terms of moving and shifting homes just due to lack of inventory, and, home prices and so forth have kind of continued to hit all-time highs here in the US, home prices rising 20% year over year still. And so home improvement in a sense is impacted on that. But I will say we need to look at all these numbers in terms of the overall kind of trend, and the comps that home improvement, for example, is annualizing are massive. Home improvement online, was achieving nearly 100% year over year growth, really almost for 2 years straight. So we've sort of seen a softening. Also, of course, now going to your local home improvement store, hardware store, et cetera, also is probably having some impact again as we emerge from the pandemic. But we need to keep that in context. Meanwhile, home furnishings, it is really remarkable to see that category, kitchen, home furnishings, continuing to really excel. And again, that's really people continuing to invest in their home environments. And we see that this nesting trend that the pandemic necessitated seems to actually really be continuing. And certainly, whether it's work from home or, cooking more at home, enjoying your home, we see that continuing to really play out in these numbers. With that category continuing to comp some massive growth online during the pandemic and continuing to grow. So that is really pretty remarkable to see that. It wouldn't have surprised to see that category soften in Q1, but we saw the opposite.
And actually, I think that category is in one of the categories where certainly in the UK and Europe where they have addressed some of the availability issues. So it was a real issue early on in the pandemic. I think, as you rightly say, people at home, so investing more in their home and home improvements and furnishings, they were really caught out by not only the availability of products, but also how to deal with the demand. And there was quite a lot of frustration. Interesting, the flip side of that was that actually that drove quite a lot of D2C traffic to specific brands who perhaps wouldn't have gone through in the past. So paint manufacturers, as an example, as opposed to buying through a DIY store, going direct to them to purchase. So it also changed that market. And I think, a couple of years on, what we see is some of the big players in this space have sort of got their house in order, got their online offering in order, and have therefore started to take advantage of that and are no longer being caught out by that massive surge in demand.
That's absolutely right. Being able to control the relationship with the customer and serve them directly is a huge shift in a market like that.
I think just as an anecdote, I was trying to get my bathroom done in the first lockdown, and talking to the builder, just impossible to get stuff because apparently everybody was having stuff done.
Yeah,
it was
that's right.
unbelievable. And even down my street at the minute, there's so many people, me included, getting more work done because, again, like you said, we're spending so much more time in our homes, and we want that place to just be far nicer than we were, I guess, that we wanted before. I guess we're spending so much more time. We've realized actually we kind of want our houses to be a bit nicer.
That's right. And you may not be moving. Again, that's
Yeah,
partially due to the changes in the home market. Really across North America and Europe, and so people realizing that let's make where I live special and to my liking. I may not be moving for a while, and I'm spending a lot more time here. I also want to touch on the grocery numbers. I think grocery is another sector that saw remarkable explosive growth necessitated by the pandemic. Again, it wasn't unusual over the previous 2 years to see year-over-year numbers of 90 to 100 or even over 100% year over year, and we saw that continuing to build through the pandemic as consumer behavior shifted, and as grocers shifted how they enabled that experience and improved on that. What's interesting in Q1 is, okay, there was a thesis out there that once the pandemic's over, consumers are going to return to pre-pandemic behaviors in mass, and the numbers don't show that. The numbers show that online grocery may have kind of reached a bit of a plateau here in Q1, but we're not going back. And so we're going to continue to see that category, I think, probably grow a little bit more modestly, quarter over quarter as we move forward. But we made that big, massive step change in consumer behavior and in how retailers need to support it. And that's a massive shift that's happened over the past few years that's going to sustain. And grocers who invest in their online experience, who invest in the online to offline experience, who can facilitate whether it's in-store or curbside pickup or delivery, are going to see benefit as consumers, frankly, are just exceptionally busy. Many juggling, families, spending more time at home, not having commutes, all driving a shift in ongoing consumer behavior. And, subscription models and regular deliveries are going to start to have, again, ongoing impact in the grocery segment as well.
Well, they just, at one point, I think they just need to sort out their substitutions, because if I get a wooden spoon instead of a bag of spaghetti ever again, then I think my wife is definitely going to go straight back to in-store shopping and move away from online.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. And I think you actually see, certainly here in North America, grocers taking more control over that fulfillment experience and less reliant on third-party services like Instacart and DoorDash, where a lot of those problems have occurred. And so, consumers' frustration and also grocers wanting to control more of the experience, I think will actually, those problems are going to resolve. But it's largely being driven by a shift in kind of the fulfillment operations within grocery. Certainly that's here in the US, where we had a lot less experience in that segment, serving this kind of customer behavior than certainly in the UK or in Northern Europe, where online grocery, had a higher degree of penetration and was more kind of normalized pre-pandemic. So I think we're going to see changes and improvements there in that segment that, again, will build customer confidence. But, my mother-in-law, who is, older now, she started ordering her groceries online during the pandemic. And, I just asked her about it the other day. She says, no, I'm never going to the grocery store again. So just one example of a market segment, right, who feels actually much better served by this new kind of pattern than the previous one.
Yeah. I think it basically took the pandemic to force people to start shopping online for groceries, for them to realize, wow, I was spending an hour in a store once a week to do my shopping when I could have been spending 5-10 minutes on my sofa, on my phone, just making my weekly purchase.
Right.
For them to realize that speed and that ease and that convenience that comes from online shopping.
That's absolutely right.
I was going to say, Najee, sorry, I almost talked over you there, but I was just going to reference our stat that we always use, which is that 60% of consumers now feel more comfortable with technology. So it's not only the fact that it's easier to do it, it's the fact that actually sort of the back's been broken of some of those technological barriers that existed before, and everyone's much more comfortable dealing with technology now, and therefore driving to online.
That's right.
A nice reminder to all of us to get our grocery shopping done. So let's close out our B2C section and now transition over to B2B, where I think we tend to see a lot more fluctuation. Jean, do you want to take us through that data, please? You're muted.
John, I think you're muted.
Someone had to do it.
Yeah. Excuse me, no, that's on me. That's my bad. So I'm going to start again. So looking at B2B e-commerce data, we see here that B2B is having a very good start to 2022 with traffic and sales both up in March and across Q1. Conversely, we see conversion rates are down pretty significantly, whereas average order size has seen a marked increase up year-on-year in March and up significantly in Q1 with 17.51%. So back to you, Michelle, with this interesting data.
Thank you, Jean. Najee, let's maybe just start with technology before we even get into some of the data. Can you speak a little bit to what you're seeing in B2B right now, maybe where this sector tends to struggle from a digital perspective, but also where you see the opportunity?
Yeah, sure. So I think struggling in the past, I think I probably would call it struggling is the kind of idea of the digital experience or the customer first approach, right? Because I think what we've seen a long time ago is the B2B experience was pretty much, we know you have to use this service, so it is what it is. This is what it looks like. It's not the easiest thing to use. It's not the most beautiful thing to use. But now that more and more people are starting to have that kind of experience with Airbnb and Uber and these other beautiful looking applications, they're starting to expect that from their B2B experiences as well. And so what we're starting to see now is B2B companies starting to utilize that digital experience or that customer-centric design philosophy first to try and create these great experiences that are really easy to use and nice to look at. Design is important even for B2B. And then on top of that, the utilization of data as well, to constantly be making things better and making them easier to use all the time. So I think that's one of the biggest opportunities, I think, is around that area.
Hugh, kind of adding on to that, when we think about opportunity, what do you think B2B leaders need to be considering from a strategy perspective as they look to the rest of the year and the future, really?
Yeah, I guess I'll echo what Najee said, which is that we've done some research into this, and what comes out loud and clear is they want a B2C experience, but in the B2B world, and with more and more of their buying transitioning online, that's becoming more important. Our stats tell us, though, that 52% of B2B buyers are frustrated by the online experience and find it very complicated. While at the same time, what we found was that 37% of all B2B buyers said their habits had changed during the pandemic, so therefore they're more inclined to shop online. And that actually 53% had changed all of their suppliers during lockdown because they just hadn't been getting the right experience. So what you see is a huge opportunity there. And that opportunity needs to be grasped with a focus on customer satisfaction. And again, going back to what we talked about before, inventory and availability. So one of the key reasons why suppliers were being changed was during the process of moving to online, products just not being available. And, that from a B2C perspective is frustrating. From a B2B perspective is, potentially business altering. So businesses providing services to B2B suppliers need to be thinking about that. As Naji says, the reference points are coming from B2C and they need to be applied to B2B. Now, it can be challenging, and it also depends hugely on the size of the business. So while we can talk about the B2B market, there's a big difference between someone buying office supplies and someone buying sheet metal. We see huge differences, but in general, more being purchased online. And of course, looming there large is also the likes of Amazon Business, and the marketplace is starting to play a bigger role. And we all know how that changed the B2C market. So we'll start to see how that changes the B2B market as well.
I'd say, a couple of things. One, agreeing fully with Naji and Hugh, early on in B2B, clearly the online was essentially a replacement for other ways of entering an order, whether that's calling a contact center or sending a fax, and now, driven by, I'd say the buyer's expectations, the shift to online and that, of course, being driven in large part by the pandemic, switching of suppliers and distributors due to shortages, early on in the pandemic in particular, had a huge impact, continues to play a role. And then there's a massive generational shift amongst the workforce, who are primarily now, digitally native, or who've, fully adopted, these sort of tools in the balance of their life. And they want it to be just as easy, just as convenient, and even more importantly, be able to complete research tasks through great online digital experiences, and don't make me work for it. Now, all that said, the operational side of it has to be excellent as well. But really, there's a massive sort of paradigm shift. Unfortunately, in B2B, there are many companies who are still lagging and not really fully embracing and adopting kind of a digital first mindset. But this is still early innings, perhaps, in that transition of the B2B market, and businesses looking to differentiate through their digital experiences, support that customer journey of that online B2B buyer, and gaining loyalty, not through old school relationships and sharing a pint or whatnot, using my British reference there, but building those long-term relationships that a lot of B2B companies, I think, have mythologized inside their business as how they're going to retain and grow. Now it's really going to play out in terms of the quality of the digital experience and supporting the customers getting their job done, because fundamentally that's what B2B is about. I do want to reflect on the data that we were looking at earlier. I think B2B is another category that saw a massive surge early in the pandemic as people were using the online channels to get PPE and other supplies. And we saw a pretty interesting dynamic early on in the pandemic. And then due really to the offline economy kind of having to be constrained and shut down during different periods of time and kind of suppressed, B2B went through a real soft spot, kind of mid to late pandemic. But now I think, see the results of the economy, in a sense, opening back up, and B2B having a very strong first quarter, really as everything from institutions to manufacturing, it really comes back in full force, and certainly even the online segment, e-commerce, also being propelled in some ways by constraints on the labor force, and that plays a role on both sides of the trading relationship. And so online is just a lot more convenient, and so we see a lot of different factors, I think, at play there. I think B2B is probably e-commerce is going to see some really strong year-over-year growth as we move forward, because we're in this sort of next phase of the market, and it's being driven by overall consumption in the economy as we kind of reemerge, in a sense, from the pandemic.
I think also, just much as with B2C, B2B needs to consider the full number of channels it has open. So while we've seen a huge rise in online, we also see the necessity for human contact. We also see the importance of the telephone, which we found quite amusing in some of our results. But actually this is the way people work. They want to operate across a number of different channels. They want to find the best way. They often want to get great advice. They want to get great insights, and they will find the best way to do that. So I think much with B2C, B2B needs to look at providing fantastic experiences, be that someone coming into a store, someone coming into a factory, someone coming in through online. So, I mean, the principles are exactly the same, right? What do you want? How do they want it? How do you make it easy for them? How do you get them to transact as quickly as possible? And make sure that that's consistent across all those different channels.
Yeah, I think the word consistent is key, because just like in B2C, but perhaps even more so in B2B, a buyer is going to expect that these channels all kind of work together. And if I do pick up the phone and call you, the person on the other end of the line knows me, knows my business, knows my order, right? And can help guide me through maybe some considered purchases or technical questions or problems that I want help on or clarification on. But all those channels need to work in concert, and that's still a huge leap for a lot of B2B companies, just as it is in a lot of B2C companies, even though there's been a lot of progress. And so these cannot be treated as siloed channels and have any shot at delivering on the customer's expectations. But old channels, as I always say, old channels don't really die. You have to instead think about how you weave them together in a constructive way. And that goes for in-person interactions or other channels that you're using to communicate with the customer. But the customer expects it to be personalized, right, for me, and consistent across all those different interactions. And there's a lot of work to be done in order to achieve that. But the digital experience now has to be thought of as primary, not as an order entry tool, as we talked about already.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all for those insights on B2B. We are approaching our last 10 minutes, so I want to move us into our last section. We've already touched on some forward-looking insights today, but we do like to wrap up our Commerce Pulse roundtables by really stretching it a bit further into the future. So looking ahead, does anyone have any general predictions for the coming summer, whether that be changes in consumer sentiment or sectors that will see big wins, technologies that will really take over? We want to hear all of your wildest predictions. Hugh, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess there's sort of two ways of looking at that. So what's going to happen the next couple of months? And then if you want to hear my crazy predictions, then let's go a bit further. But let's start with what will happen in the next couple of months. So I think a trend that we've seen before, and I think one that will increase in importance, is sustainability and ethics. And, that is driven by lots of things we've talked about, but also increasingly by the war in Ukraine. Our data is telling us that more and more consumers are using sustainability and ethics as a reason for purchasing. So 67% of consumers said they will actively choose a company that is ethical and morally sound. But of course, the flip side of that is what we also see as consumers demanding, really, really fast delivery. So I think our stats tell us that 4% of global shoppers want their products to be delivered in 2 hours. So there's a bit of a challenge there with businesses doing things ethically, sustainably, and also giving consumers that really fast delivery. But nonetheless, I think that the companies that crack that will do really well. Lots of stuff that we're doing at the moment, looking into how you can deliver things sustainably, create sustainable companies, and of course do it ethically. I think we'll also see sort of that fight continuing between the marketplaces, D2C, and some of those new channels. So again, our stats telling us about 42% of everything spent online globally going through marketplaces. About 8% last year through D2C, but that's supposed to rise this year. So according to the data that we have, D2C is going to become more and more important. So that sometimes sort of surprises people based on the fact that marketplaces seem to be getting stronger. But the message tends to be that D2C is also going to get stronger. And then we also see sort of the addition of other channels, which we've kind of mentioned before, gaming, metaverse, etc. So they're kind of my shorter term things to look at. I think longer term, well, let's go totally nuts. I think we talk all the time about digitization of products, but also sort of what constitutes a consumer. So we tend to think about buying online as buying something physical, but actually about 33% of everything that's bought online is a digital product. So we encourage clients and prospects to be thinking about what parts of their products and their services that they can digitize. And increasingly that becomes more and more important when we start talking about the metaverse and gaming. We just done some research into that where, correct me if I'm wrong here, Naji, with my stats, but 42% of consumers believe their avatar to be as important as themselves. Yes, got that stat right. Great. So we start to see this drive towards purchasing products, not just for your physical self, but also for your digital self. And then kind of really going crazy and nuts. I mean, that really poses the question, what constitutes a consumer? So do you even have to be alive to be a consumer? What about post-death consumerism? Who will we be marketing to in the future? We'll be marketing to people, to AIs, to avatars, who knows? So I think probably there needs to be a degree of strategy which is focusing on what a future consumer looks like, and it is not necessarily flesh and blood standing in front of you.
Okay, well, thank you for those terrifying predictions. Naji, do you want to follow up with yours?
I don't know if I can. For me, it's kind of in two parts. If we're looking at the summer, one of the things that we've all seen a lot of recently, this whole idea of NFTs. But the thing that I find really interesting about them is the idea of utilizing them for membership and loyalty. So I think over the next couple of months, I expect a couple more brands to be utilizing it for that. We've already seen a couple doing that already, especially for things like pre-orders. So, hey, get this NFT, you get access to the physical item later, and you also got access to all these other digital add-ons, and then they drop ship stuff into your wallet later on at a later date, which I think is a really interesting part. Then, much like you, I'll go a little bit further out. What I really like about that is the idea that we're now got this whole idea of digital items having scarcity, which means that they can have value. And I think going back to that stat that Hugh mentioned around the 42% of gamers saying that their avatar was part of their identity, I think that just shows you that people will spend large amounts on a digital item within the metaverse for themselves. We've already seen Gucci selling a handbag in Roblox for $4,100. So we can, that might be a lot of money for a digital item, but hey, if you're a person that buys Gucci bags in real life and your avatar is part of your identity, you're going to buy it. So for me, it's that flow from NFT being utilized for loyalty and membership, moving through into the metaverse, and hopefully some interesting digital experiences that we'll be able to see and experience over the next couple of years.
I still don't understand what the metaverse is, and I
have a whole presentation if you like.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Naji, we should have you on a podcast we're going to be doing on the metaverse, but we'll tee that up for later. I'm going to start maybe then on the longer term kind of topic there, and then move back into maybe shorter term. I think long term, I think what we're talking about here with NFTs and virtual worlds and experiences is likely to become pretty important. I actually think this year, though, the metaverse and NFTs are going to go into the trench of disillusionment. I'm not even going to call it a trough. I'm going to call it a trench. It's going to go deep into disillusionment. We're going to see a lot of stories. I don't actually have the name off the top of my head, but there's an example of a virtual game that was selling NFTs for hundreds of thousands of dollars that disappeared overnight. The media also loves these stories, by the way, so they tend to kind of get played up. I think a lot of consumers are a little cautious, uncertain. We have other data that shows that only about 10% of consumers in the U.S. Have really engaged in kind of metaverse, and even fewer even understand what it's called. What is this thing? So there's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of conversation. I've been having a lot of conversations about this. It was a huge topic at Shop Talk. But the reality is it's very early. It's very squishy. It's another example of a long-term trend people feel some urgency around because they've all been through previous chapters in digital evolution, like mobile, where maybe some people got caught out and maybe were skeptical and ended up kind of paying the price. And then there's other examples where things kind of came and went early. They'll probably come back later, like augmented reality and virtual reality, which some would argue is a part of this metaverse topic. But I think this year we're going to see experiments, and I'm not going to discourage those, but the actual commercial impact is going to be very, very modest. And, you know, for brands that are very much targeting gamers in that demographic, there's probably some interesting opportunities for marketing and potential e-commerce. But in general, I think we're actually going to see, you know, this really kind of hit the seafloor in the trench, and then it'll start to come back, because I think ultimately it is a very important area, and it will have a meaningful impact on society and in commerce. But I don't think that's going to happen right away. I also think this summer could prove to be a very challenging one in business as a whole. You know, we see the indications of that in the economy right now. That doesn't change the long-term trends around digital-first strategy, and I think it's actually going to be really important for businesses not to take their eye off the ball as they see some challenging business results related to supply chain issues, war in Ukraine, consumer confidence, inflation. A lot of businesses are going to be forced to raise prices. That may also suppress, you know, demand within their categories, depending on who they're serving. If they're serving high-income consumers, maybe it has very little impact. But you know, certainly in the mass market, we're likely to see that. So I think we're in for some turbulence through the summer, perhaps even longer. I think that for brands and retailers and B2B companies who do not take their eye off the ball, who continue to push forward with their digital strategies, and pivot their organizations into what I call a digital first mindset. And you know, that doesn't mean your other channels or your other business processes aren't important. Of course they are. In fact, these all need to work in concert together. But it's going to be really important that businesses don't take their eye off that ball, because it will prove to be a long-term differentiator and strength of their business if they continue down that highway. But I think the results we're likely to see in the business environment this summer and fall may be quite challenging due to all these different factors, rising interest rates. You know, there's a lot of things we could talk about that are going to kind of mingle together to change consumer buying. There will be some segments, though, I think that will see some really nice year-over-year growth, and that I think is related to apparel, luxury, and travel categories. But again, that's kind of coming off maybe some softness earlier in the pandemic, and they'll see some nice year-over-year growth as a result. But you know, so we're going to see, you know, some mixed signals there. But it'll be a very interesting kind of turbulent summer, in my opinion.
Well, what excellent promo for the next Commerce Pulse.
See if that prediction holds true or not. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for all of those predictions, everyone. We will look forward to discussing them more on our next Commerce Pulse Quarterly Roundtable, which will take place in the summer. We'll see how this all pans out. I want to thank Brian, Naji, and Hugh for joining me today, for sharing all of their fantastic insights. You can find all of our panelists on LinkedIn to hear more from each of them individually, or you can check out the Bloomreach and the Wunderman Thompson Commerce websites to learn more about their companies. And finally, the monthly data like the trends we discussed here today can always be found on our blog at bloomreach.com. So with that, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next quarter. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.